Uniting a nation or tearing it apart? Egypt votes on a new constitution. Supporters of President Mohamed Morsi say a yes vote is a yes to Islam. The secular opposition is saying no to a constitution it says will divide Egypt. This is Inside Story. The scenes are reminiscent of the revolution that overthrew Egypt's longtime president, Hosni Mubarak. Mass demonstrations, tanks on the streets, protesters killed and injured, and divided opinions about the powers of the man in charge and the future direction of the country. Almost 2 years on now from the uprising, Egyptians are being asked to vote in a referendum setting out the terms of a new constitution. Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi defended his decision to press ahead with the referendum in a nationally televised speech.
The nation is ready for the referendum on time. If the people agree, then they will start building institutions upon this foundation. If it is rejected, I will use my authority and duty to create a new constitutional assembly based on an agreement or on direct elections for a new assembly. I will never allow anyone to kill or destroy a public foundation. I will not allow those calling for the overthrow of the people's legitimate government, the free design that Egyptians have taken.
Meanwhile, prominent opposition leader Mohamed Elewa Badar is urging supporters to vote no in Saturday's vote on the draft constitution.
No matter the outcome of the referendum. So I can be clear, the referendum is void. The constitution is void. We will continue to work towards the downfall of this constitution before the referendum and after, in every legal, peaceful and democratic method available.
So will Egypt's referendum help resolve this constitutional crisis? Here to give us their opinions are three guests. In Cairo, Sondos Asem of the Freedom and Justice Party. She's a member of the party's Foreign Relations Committee. Also in Cairo, Ahmed Naguib. He's a member of the Egyptian Current Party and of the No to the Militarisation of the Constitution campaign. And in London, Mohamed Elewa Badar, a senior lecturer in International and Islamic Law at Brunel University. Previously, he served as a chief judge for the Egyptian Ministry of Justice. Sondos Asem, this referendum, the president's critics will argue, has come at a huge cost for Egypt. After weeks of protests and violence that have left several people killed, hundreds injured, and that have plunged the country into turmoil. Has it been worth the price?
Let me first disagree with the title of this episode, that we have a constitutional crisis. It's not a crisis. It's actually a great blessing for Egypt and for all Egyptians to have a referendum on their first post-revolutionary constitution that has been drafted by a democratically elected panel that represents all sections and currents in Egyptian society.
But many Egyptians are against it. Many Egyptians are against it. They say that the whole drafting process was not inclusive, was not representative. Isn't it in the long term self-defeating?
Well, there are people who support it and people who reject it, and at the end, the ballot box should decide which course the country would take. So whoever agrees on the constitution should go and vote yes, and whoever disagrees should go and vote no. And regarding your first question, that we have been witnessing an escalation of violence in the past few weeks. In fact, we believe that having a referendum and listening to the will of the people through democracy and through the ballot box is in fact the solution to this problem, and would not exacerbate the problem, but would solve it. So we believe that having the referendum would stabilize the country and would turn us to a new step and a new phase where we can effectively build institutions and a functional democracy.
Ahmed Naguib, isn't this the best way to push Egypt forward, to allow all Egyptians to have their say in a democratic process, in a referendum, in order to bring Egypt out of this turmoil and instability?
Well, let me tell you something. First of all, the term stability has been used in 2 referendums and elections, and we have not seen any stability in the past 2 years. It's a misnomer, and it's quite a fallacy to say there will be stability after this referendum. If the referendum goes with a yes result, more or less the challengers of the constitutionality of the results will continue to push for a reform, a real reform. What had happened is that President Morsi had impugned his decisions because he knew that the Constitutional Court would have issued a statement saying that the Constitutional Assembly that drafted the constitutions was actually unconstitutional, which makes the whole process unconstitutional and void. For some, they consider this as a void process.
But what is the main basis for your rejection of this draft constitution? Why are you voting no?
Personally, and with a lot of young people who have suffered a lot from the militarization of the deep state in Egypt in the past 60 years, and in the past 2 years, a lot of violations were because of the military trials of civilians. We have a campaign called No to the Militarization of the Constitution. It's ironic enough that the Brotherhood had stated in many occasions that they're against the militarization of the Constitution and against military trials of civilians. Now we see that there's no civilian supervision over the budget and expenditures of the military. There's a National Defense Committee which will be dominated by the military. Not just that, but any decisions regarding the military has to go through this committee, which does not have a consultative stature, but actually they take the decisions on behalf of the president, with the president among them. So we say no to the militarization of the Constitution because the military has for 60 years been on top of the Constitution and of the country, which we reject. There's a lot of corruption within the military establishment, and we would like the parliament, the elected parliament, to have oversight of the military and the decisions made within, and definitely not to subject citizens and civilians to military trials, which is unjust.
Let's pick up on this point with Mohamed Elewa Badar. From a legal perspective, how concerned should Egyptians be about the growing influence of the military and about the continuation of military trials for civilians? If I can just quote from Article 198, which provides that civilians may not be tried before the military justice system except for crimes that harmed the armed forces, and this shall be defined by law. Is this specific enough to guarantee that it will not be broadly used against civilians?
Thanks again for highlighting this point regarding the military judiciary section 4. But before I will answer this question, I would like just to say a brief comment about the situation right now in Egypt, and also we, the Egyptian in London and elsewhere in the world. Again, what strikes me first of all, if there are like 8 million outside Egypt, and we find that the only people entitled or eligible to vote 500,000. Whether or not they can use the ID or passport. No, they cannot use the passport, only IDs, and if they don't have an ID, they have no right to vote. The situation itself, for me, it's not the right situation. People outside, less than 5% they have they are eligible to vote. That's number one. People inside Egypt, again, we're speaking about lawyers, but people inside Egypt, not all of them, they are lawyers. And even if there are lawyers, it will be very hard for them to understand 236 articles of provision in 10 days. So which referendum we are speaking about?
But just,
is it like
Can we though address this specific question that the previous guest, Ahmed Naguib, talked about, which is the concern among many that military trials for civilians will continue under this constitution? How concerned should we be about the wide scope of what constitutes harm to the armed forces?
What Mr. Ahmed Naguib again he mentioned again, it's like a part of a big parcel or big package, yes, about a military concern. Yes, I agree with the broad terms incorporated in this when it said yes, any conduct which yes, the consequence of this conduct is harming the army. Harming the army, okay, is it by physical conduct? Harming the army, can it be by verbal conduct? What about a journalist tomorrow who will speak about something which can harm the army, but again, harm the army in which way? So yes, I disagree with these very broad terms about the Constitution, and then it will open the way, yes, for anyone who will say something against the army maybe, which can harm the army. So harming, I'm not sure, again, what does it mean or what does it entail? So that's one of the concerns, but again, if you ask me, this is not only the concerns for the Egyptian, we have a lot of concerns and we need someone to come and interpret this draft constitution in order that we can go and vote. So voting for something which, again, was a very vague terms, I have to say it's illegal. And again, I'm really was surprised, you know, with this 7 days, you know, in advance to let the Egyptian go to vote for a document, which is, again, the majority have nothing to know about it, and they need some time. Even people outside Egypt, they need some time to read it.
Another one of the major concerns for many, Sondos Asem, is that this constitution may actually undermine human rights, and specifically the rights of women. Are the rights of women in danger under this constitution? Should it have very specifically talked about equality between men and women and not merely talked about ensuring freedom from discrimination based on gender?
Well, in fact, the civil rights in general and the rights of women and minorities are safeguarded in this constitution. If you look at the preamble, it actually addresses both male and female citizens alike and states that all citizens, whether males and females, are equal, and that there is no discrimination whatsoever among citizens regardless of their background. And also there are actually articles also in the constitution supporting the rights of women in specific cases, such as widowed women, divorced women, and female breadwinners that are actually they are millions in Egyptian society. So I believe that there is positive discrimination for women enshrined in this constitution, and even the articles, for example, Article 33 in the constitution that states that all citizens are equal. It actually effectively means that even men and women are equal before the law.
But some say that it should have gone further. Some say it should have specified that women have equal rights with men. Do you agree?
That is specified in the preamble of the Constitution, and let me tell you that there was an article that stated that there is no discrimination against women, and those who actually called for eliminating this article were the secular and liberal members of the Constituent Assembly, simply because the article also states that that Sharia law should be taken into account in some cases, for example, that have to do with inheritance, etc. So we have actually eliminated the article in order to achieve consensus and to respond to the concerns of some liberal and secular members of the Assembly. And overall, the Constitution actually it actually addresses all citizens, and all the second chapter of the Constitution about civil liberties and civil rights.
Let's pick up on this point. Let's pick up on the point you've
rights.
made on Islamic law. And of course, there's quite a bit of concern on the amount of interpretation this would be open to. Ahmed Naguib, this reference to the principles of Sharia as the main source of legislation, quote unquote, isn't new. It, in fact, it's existed under the previous constitution, the 1971 constitution. So the relationship between Islam and Egyptian law has been there for quite a while. Why all the controversy suddenly around this?
Because of the Article 215 at the very end of the constitution. There are several points in that constitution that gives the right to the state and equally to the citizens to preserve their identity as well as principles of a good family, which is undefined and unclear and based on who? and linked to Sharia. Now, that gives people the right to go on the streets and question women and men if the people they're walking with are their husband or wife or not, and it gives the state the right to meddle with people's privacy. And on another level, the fact that, for instance, there's no reference to whose interpretation of Sharia will be enforced. Whether we have 4 different madhabs, and we also have different groups like the Salafis, like the Sufis, whose interpretation of the enforcement of Sharia will be taken into consideration. The fact that, for instance, the institution like Al-Azhar is not mentioned as the point of reference of Sharia, that makes it very controversial. So if the Salafis make it to power today, they will enforce their version of Islam, and if another group in 4 years later, will they enforce it? There has to be a point of reference at least.
Mohamed Elewa Badar, as a former judge, who would be the ultimate arbiter? Who would decide how some of these principles of Islamic law would be interpreted into law? And how realistic is this concern that Sharia will suddenly become the law of the land, that much of the legislation of Egypt will be based on Islamic law?
First of all, let me put it again in a very legal, from very legal perspective, to let also the audience understand what we are talking about. Yes, we have in 1971 as a constitution. In 1971 we have the same article, and then in 1980 it was again just small amendment. That yes, it be the principal source of legislation. But today we have also Article 219 regarding the interpretation. Back to your question, it should be the constitutional code. So when we speak about something constitution, we have the constitutional code. But it seems, again, from my point of view and from the point of view of millions of Egyptians, there is something in this draft constitution to marginalize the constitutional code, and again it will give all the power for the Al-Azhar, which again I agree for Al-Azhar, but again if you give more power for the Grand Sheikh Imam of Al-Azhar, yes, he'll be independent, yes, but he will not be dismissed. What does it mean he will not be dismissed? Again, so all the interpretation will go to Al-Azhar. And again, the term Sharia itself, and I can challenge anyone watching now Al Jazeera English, what the term Sharia entail? What are the primary sources of Sharia? Is it Quran and Sunnah? And what are the secondary sources of the Sharia? What are the authentic hadith and unauthentic hadith? What are the interpretation of the Quran and some interpretation? I have to remind the people again that when we go to Article 219, as if, that Sharia is codified, and Sharia, everything now, there is no gray area, everything is white. Of course not. And the Prophet himself, I said, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he himself did not interpret the Quran. He left it because he wants this document, which is again not meant to be a legal document. He wants this document, the Quran itself, to be flexible, so in order to deal with subjects and situations in the 21st century. So the Prophet himself did not interpret the Quran. So when I read now Article 219 or Article 2 and Article 4, that they are speaking about already established principles. By the way, these established principles, again, I'm talking now and addressing this to the expert of the Muslim Brotherhood, which I would like that one day you will have to listen to us and to listen about our opinion as scholars. That the Sharia, Islamic law Sharia itself and its interpretation, yes, it's subject for different interpretation, but again, we have to consider something again, because we go to say yes, you are. If you say yes, you are
clearly
going
this
to
is one
paradise.
of the,
No, just let me one second, one minute.
Divisive issues, but I do want to put this point.
No, 1 minute. I want to say that Islamic Sharia law. When you look at the Sharia, you are not speaking about the Quran itself, because there is a big debate. We have the Quran and some legal provisions from the Quran. Yes, it's sources of the Sharia. So I have to say Sharia itself, a big part of the Sharia is man-made product. It's not divine nature.
Precisely, and that is leading to a lot of concern about the interpretation of Islamic law.
Yes.
So let me turn to Sondos Asem. Sondos Asem, what do you say to the liberal, to the secularists, to religious minorities like Christians who are worried about the imposition of a strict interpretation of Islamic law?
let me respond to the previous questions that, in fact, the second article of the Constitution states that the principles of Sharia are the main source of legislation. And here it is stating the principles, not the rulings of Sharia, and it's not saying that it's the only source of legislation. So Sharia is the main source of legislation, and this is actually a consensus among Muslims and Christians in Egypt, and also among Muslims and seculars. No, please don't. No. Please let me continue, please. I have not interrupted you. I have not interrupted you.
No, the Egyptians should know that we have also Article 19, 219 for the first time ever. We don't have it before, which again said yes, general evidence, foundational rules, rules of jurisprudence. So if we read the Constitution, we have to read the Constitution, Article 2 in conjunction or together with Article 2119, not to mislead the Egyptians. That's all. Thank you. And sorry for
I agree.
Well, let's perhaps move on. Let's move on at this point.
No, let me continue that actually Article 219 has been put precisely because of the concerns of people like Dr. Mohammed, that there will be a vague interpretation, and that's why the members of the Assembly have put this article in order to evade any such misinterpretation of the second article.
Ahmed Naguib, do you think that it would have been far wiser for the Constituent Assembly to have omitted this reference to Islamic law, to simply have kept Islam as the state religion, but no reference to Sharia?
The Sharia is part of the law. I mean, Sharia means law in Arabic. So the Sharia law means that the source of legislation becomes in compliance with what Sharia's principles are. The difference or the controversy more or less is about the sources of Sharia as mentioned in the Constitution. What are those sources? Some people say that the 14 years of Islamic governance could be part of the source, this heritage of Islamic governance. So it's controversial, it's very vague how it's mentioned. And we've seen in the 1971 Constitution, it had never really had much impact on the legislation except for inheritance, marriage, but not so much the criminal law and the penal law. It has issues. It's very debatable that it had effective impact in any case.
Let me get your final thoughts, though. We're running out of time. Just in general, what would happen if the no camp prevailed in this referendum? Has this essentially morphed into something more than an anti-Morsi, anti-constitution crisis? Is it all about keeping the president's powers in check? And what would happen if the country is once again in a state of limbo?
Well, if President Morsi, his presidency is more or less not in danger just right now. However, if the vote is for no, he will have to call for direct elections of those who will be in this assembly, which means that it should be and it will be a representation of people's votes. In that case, this new committee has the right in the transitional articles to say that right after the referendum is voted upon, and if it goes with yes, then there should be a presidential elections. This is all up in the air. But for now, the president will continue with perhaps a very struggling presidency to maintain some sort of stability. But it will all depend on the results of this referendum, and if there will be another one, then that's the case. It will also depend if it's passed, if it has included a clause on transitional phase.
Sure. Sondos Asem, why do you feel this referendum should be passed?
I believe that this constitutional draft is actually the product of the best possible consensus among the diverse Egyptian political forces and currents. It has taken 6 months of discussions. Each article of the Constitution has taken at least 300 hours of discussions and debates and hearing sessions. I believe that
I would like just to know how many scholars were involved in this discussion. There is one scenario now, and everything will be in 2 weeks. First of all, yes, if the majority of Egyptians will say yes it will be yes. And then again, this is not the final result, you know, but we have to learn from our mistakes. We have to learn that in the future, if the Egyptian will say yes, or maybe it will end up with yes, okay, we have to find, if they say yes, it's yes, we have to respect it. If they say no, we have to really look at all these rich professors, scientific, you know, I would like to have like 70% of these people who know about constitution, people who can draft constitution. I don't care about someone who is former Minister of Foreign Affairs sitting there.
The debate on this no doubt will continue, but unfortunately we do have to leave it here. Let me thank all of our guests. In Cairo, Sondos Asem; in London, Mohamed Elewa Badar; and in Cairo as well, Ahmed Naguib. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. You can see the program again and watch many others by visiting our website at aljazeera.com. From me, Ghida Fakhry, and the entire team, thanks for watching.